everyone, and welcome to another episode of It's Your Grade. In today's video, we're going to do a introduction to polyatomic ions. This is just simply what they are and some little tricks in how you can lessen the load in trying to memorize them. I do recommend getting some flashcards and just committing these to memory. This is another building block that you will need to be able to recognize polyatomic ions quite readily. So first of all, what is a polyatomic ion? Well, if we break down the word, poly typically means many, and then of course, atomic refers to atoms. So polyatomic ions are simply ions that contain more than one atom. Up until this point, we've only been talking about metals and nonmetals, which are single atom ions. One thing that you will notice about polyatomic ions is that they often, not all of them, but often, many of them end with either ATE or they end with ITE. And any polyatomic ion that ends with 8 is typically going to have more oxygen atoms than if it were to end with ite. So one way that you can help lessen the load is if you remember what the 8 polyatomic ion is, and you know that it 8 more oxygens, then it'll be much easier to remember the ite because it usually has one less oxygen. And the charge stays the same as well. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that. So if we have NO3 minus, this is known as nitrate. So there's that ATE ending. It has 3 oxygens. And if you wanted to know what the ite version of this would be, we know that it will have 1 less oxygen. So it would be NO2, and the charge stays the same. So we know that it's NO2 minus, and this is now known as nitrite. There are other examples. So for example, SO4 minus 2, this is known as sulfate, the ATE ending. To figure out what the ite version of this would be, we simply need to know that there's going to be 1 less oxygen. So instead of 4 oxygens, we will have 3, and the charge will stay the same. So SO3 minus, this is known as sulfite. That's just a couple of tricks for nitrate and sulfite. You can look through your list of polyatomic ions that you have to remember to figure out some other patterns that you may see like this. There is one more I can show, which is chlorate, ClO3 minus. This is chlorate. And then there is ClO2 minus, so 1 less oxygen. And this is known as chlorite. There's usually only one positive polyatomic ion that you will see, and this is NH4 positive, and this is known as ammonium. Other easy to remember ones would be cyanide. If I can spell it right. There we go. Sorry. Cyanide. And cyanide is simply Cn minus. Another -1 charge polyatomic ion would be hydroxide, which you typically see a lot because it's a strong base. Other particular ones that are perhaps a little more challenging to remember, peroxide. Peroxide is an interesting one because it's two oxygens. And I just remembered this one because there's two oxygens and it has a -2 charge. So I just simply remember 2, 2. I don't know. You can come up with your own ways to memorize these. Acetate. So this is another one that ends with ATE. So you know there's going to be a lot of oxygens. And this one in particular is C2H3O2, and it has a -1 charge. And I just remember 232, and I remember that you have CHO as your atoms. So that just kind of helps you remember the number of atoms of each one, but it's a -1 charge. Do I have any other ones I can talk about? So with the chlorite, I'll go back up here with chlorite. I'm going to get a different color so it'll stand out a bit. So with chlorite, we know that 8 versus 8, 8 has more oxygens, 8 has less. Well, if you understand the term hypo, usually this means like lower. We think like hypoglycemic, which means you have low blood sugar. There's a polyatomic ion that's called hypochlorite. And so when I see the word hypo, it means that it has one less oxygen. It's hypochlorite. So one less oxygen than regular chlorite. The charge is going to stay the same. So we had two oxygens for chlorite. This will now be ClO minus. And I could go the opposite with chlorate. So there's a term that typically means, I don't know if it actually means this, but I've noticed this with a couple of the polyatomic ions. If you have the beginning PER, per, so there's perchlorate and perchlorate, that usually means there's 4 oxygens. So ClO4 minus. Anyway, that's a brief introduction to polyatomic ions. There are many more to learn. Perhaps I'll make a second video to go over some of the other ones, but typically if you look at the eights versus the ites and you know that the eights, quote unquote, made 8 more oxygens, that will help you remember the polyatomic ions. So, and the key with that is that the 8 versus the ite, the charge stays the same. It's just the number of oxygens that's going to change. So with that, I will end the video here. Thank you all for listening. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know if there's a particular video you'd like to see and I'll get it out. Other videos to follow this are going to involve naming compounds that involve polyatomic ions. So once you have them memorized, then the next video will make more sense. So happy studying, everyone.